My brother stood by the fireplace like he owned the truth. His voice was calm, measured, almost apologetic, which made it worse. The words came out smooth, rehearsed, the way you talk about something you've already decided is fact. He was telling everyone what I'd supposedly done behind their backs. What I'd stolen. What I'd lied about. What I'd hidden. The room didn't erupt. That silence was worse than screaming. My mother's mouth tightened into a thin line. My uncle leaned back in his chair like he'd been waiting for permission to believe the worst about me. Aunt Ruth looked at her hands. No one asked me to explain. No one asked for my side. Someone just suggested I cool off and get some air. I felt the ground shift beneath me. This wasn't spontaneous anger. This was a performance. And everyone was playing their part perfectly. When I finally asked my brother to repeat the accusation, he smiled. Practice. That smile told me everything. This wasn't improvised. This was prepared. Rehearsed. Planned. I was being painted as a liar in my own family. And no one questioned a single word. That night, alone in my room, I replayed every second like a film I couldn't stop watching. Who interrupted whom? Who avoided my eyes? Who nodded before my brother even finished his sentences? Who looked relieved to finally have an explanation for things they'd never actually questioned? I realized something that made my stomach turn. My brother hadn't convinced them of the truth. He'd simply given them a version that required no effort to believe. Believing him meant they didn't have to question their own choices. They didn't have to explain past favoritism. They didn't have to wonder why he was always the one who handled family matters. They didn't have to feel guilty. I got out of bed and opened a storage box I hadn't touched in years. Old papers. Copies of documents I was asked to hold on to. At the time I thought I was helping. Now, looking at everything organized in that box, it felt intentional. Like breadcrumbs I'd been collecting without knowing why. I spread everything across my bed. Conversations. Records. And as I looked at them, one thought kept running through my mind. My brother knew I had these. He'd watched me keep them over the years. He'd smiled when I organized them. He was betting I'd stay silent. The next morning I sent a message. Polite. Neutral. I asked for clarification on one small detail of his story. Nothing accusatory, just a simple question. He responded immediately. Too immediately. Too smoothly. He restated his claim with extra information I hadn't asked for. Information that didn't match my memory. Information that felt defensive even though I hadn't accused him of anything. I checked the dates in my documents. Then I checked them again. His timeline didn't add up. The thread tugged back. I didn't pull hard. I didn't respond to his message. I didn't argue. I just let the silence sit there. Silence does something noise never could. It makes people uneasy. Makes them talk more. It makes them add details they shouldn't add. It makes them try to convince you when you haven't even disagreed with them yet. He messaged again 2 hours later. This time without me prompting him. Offering more explanation. More details. More things that didn't match what I remembered. I saved every word. Growing up, my brother was the translator of intentions. If something went wrong, he explained it. If something went right, he summarized it. He always said he was protecting the family. I used to believe that meant protecting me too. I used to think he had my back. Now I saw it differently. He controlled the narrative because no one ever checked his sources. He was the messenger, and we all just accepted what the messenger said. I remembered being excluded from decisions, for my own good. I remembered being thanked for sacrifices I never volunteered to make. I remembered him speaking for me when I was in the same room. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It was cumulative. It was years of small moments that I'd rationalized as him being helpful. But looking at it all together now, I saw the pattern. Every time he handled something, he benefited. Every time he explained something, his version was the one everyone believed. Every time he spoke for me, I lost a little bit of my own voice. And that meant the truth was already scattered everywhere. I just had to find it and piece it together. I opened my laptop and started making a list. Not for revenge yet. Just for clarity. Just to understand what I was actually dealing with. I visited my mother, Elaine, without mentioning the accusation. I just wanted to sit with her. To watch her. To see if she really believed what my brother had told everyone. We talked about ordinary things, work, the weather, neighbors. But when my brother's name came up in conversation, something shifted. Her hands stilled. She didn't realize I was watching how carefully she chose her next words. I asked her casually when she first heard the story about me. She hesitated. That pause was new. I'd never heard her hesitate about my brother before. She admitted he'd come to her weeks earlier. Concerned, she called it. He'd framed it as worry, not blame. He'd sat in her kitchen and expressed his concerns about me in a way that sounded caring. Protective. Like he was looking out for the family. He nodded. I said nothing. I didn't correct her. I didn't defend myself. I let her think I was just listening. But what I was really doing was watching her realize on her own that concern doesn't usually come packaged with rehearsed details. Real worry is messy and emotional. Real concern asks questions. It doesn't come with a prepared narrative. I saw the moment doubt flickered across her face. I didn't push it. I just let it sit there. I started making a new list. Not of lies, but of benefits. Who benefited from me being discredited? Not emotionally, practically. Access, control, decision-making, information flow. My brother's name appeared at the center of every circle. I remembered times he insisted on handling the paperwork. I'll take care of it, he'd say. And we all let him. I remembered him controlling which family members talked to which other family members. I remembered him being the one who explained things to my parents. I remembered him managing communications like he was the CEO of the family. When I was discredited, who got more power? My brother. When my voice was questioned, whose voice became louder? My brother's. When the family was divided, who benefited from that division? My brother. Every single time. Doubt, I learned, doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be aggressive. Just needs to be placed carefully. Like a question left on the table with no answer. Like a detail that doesn't quite fit. Like a timeline that has a gap. I placed my doubt carefully. And I waited to see what would happen. At a family lunch a week later, Aunt Ruth mentioned something casually. She was talking about an event my brother had referenced in his accusation. The event that supposedly proved what I'd done. But her timeline didn't match his. Not even close. She laughed it off, saying, I might be wrong. The way people do when they don't want to contradict someone directly. But I heard the uncertainty in her voice. I heard her questioning her own memory because she was trying to be polite. I didn't correct her. I didn't agree with her either. Instead, I asked her what else she remembered about that time. I asked her about other details. I listened. Really listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't guide her answer. I just let her talk. By the time she finished, she was frowning. Confused. She was sensing the inconsistency herself without me ever pointing it out. She was realizing that what my brother had said didn't match what she actually remembered. I thanked her for lunch. I told her the food was delicious. I acted like the conversation hadn't shifted anything. But as I was leaving, I saw her. She was staring at her phone, scrolling through old messages, trying to verify her own memory, trying to figure out what was true. That's all I needed. Memory had been triggered. That was enough. I mapped everything on my laptop. Every conversation. Every date. Every action. Who spoke to whom first. The order of events. The timeline of who knew what and when. The pattern was undeniable. My brother's story relied on private conversations. No witnesses. No records. Just him saying things happened a certain way. And everyone believing him because why wouldn't they? Mine didn't. Had copies. Emails. Text messages. Third-party confirmations he'd forgotten about because he never thought silence would come with receipts. He never thought I'd actually keep track. I made a folder on my laptop called Evidence. I organized it by date, by category, by person. Every document had a source. Every message had a timestamp. Every claim could be verified. I didn't plan to use it yet. I didn't even know if I would. But having it felt like having ground beneath my feet again. Having it felt like control. Having it felt like the truth was finally on my side. I closed the folder and didn't open it again. Not yet. Not until I was ready. My brother grew bolder. More confident. He started correcting people about me when I wasn't there. "That's not how she is," he'd say, like he knew me better than I knew myself. "She was always sensitive," he'd tell people. "She gets defensive when she's wrong," he'd explain to family members. He spoke for me. He answered questions that weren't directed at him. He assumed my quiet meant surrender. He thought my silence meant I'd accepted what he'd said as truth. At a gathering, he joked about how sensitive I was. How I couldn't handle criticism. How I was dramatic about small things. People laughed. Nervous, obligated laughter. The kind of laughter that comes from not knowing what else to do. I smiled once. Just once. A real smile. Not forced. Just calm and certain. That smile unsettled him. I could see it in his face. He spent the rest of the night watching me. Trying to read my expression. Trying to figure out what I knew. Trying to understand why I wasn't fighting back. Kept my face empty. And that emptiness scared him more than anger ever could. He cornered me in the kitchen days later. His voice was low. Pretending concern. He suggested I apologize to keep the peace. He said the family was stressed. He said my stubbornness was making things worse. He said I just needed to let this go. I asked him one question. Clear. Which version do you want me to apologize for? His jaw tightened. The color in his face changed. He said I was overthinking. He said I was being defensive. He said I was making this bigger than it needed to be. He nodded. Overthinking is what people accuse you of when they're afraid you're finally thinking clearly. I said it quietly. Like a fact. Like something I'd already decided was true. Then I walked past him and left the kitchen. He didn't follow. He didn't respond. He just stood there, realizing that I wasn't going to be silent anymore. But I wasn't going to be loud either. That was the scariest thing for him, that I'd found a way to be neither silent nor angry. I'd found my own power. A message thread lit up in the family group chat. Plans for a gathering. Updates about relatives. Side comments about who was doing what. My brother sent a message summarizing an event. He was confident. He was detailed. He was wrong. I replied with a neutral correction. Just a factual statement about what actually happened. And I attached a single document. No commentary. No accusation. No explanation. Just the evidence. The chat went silent. Minutes passed. Long minutes where I could feel everyone reading what I'd sent. Rereading it. Checking the dates. Checking the facts. Then my cousin asked a question. Not to me but to him. He answered too fast. His answer contradicted something he'd said before. Someone else asked another question. Then another. The silence shifted direction. It wasn't angry. It was worse. It was people gently, quietly realizing that what they'd believed might not be true. It was them discovering it themselves instead of me telling them. My brother typed a long response defending himself. No one responded to it. I watched the notifications pile up. 3 dots appeared and disappeared as people started typing responses, then deleted them. They were choosing their words carefully now. Choosing whether to believe him or the evidence. I knew which way they were leaning because silence speaks louder than words ever could. My uncle sent a private message to me asking if I had more documents. Just that simple question told me everything. He wasn't asking to attack my brother. He was asking because he needed to understand what was true. He needed evidence because words alone weren't enough anymore. I sent him everything organized by date. He didn't respond immediately. But 20 minutes later, he posted in the family chat with a question directed at my brother. A question that couldn't be answered without admitting inconsistency. My brother tried to explain, but his explanation only created more questions. Each answer he gave contradicted something from his original story. Each clarification made things muddier. The family watched it happen in real time, watching him dig himself deeper with every message. I didn't need to say anything else. The evidence was working. The questions were working. The family was waking up on their own, and that was worth more than any argument I could have made. Over the next week he started revising. Not retracting, that would be admitting he'd lied. Just adjusting. Small changes, framed as clarifications. As better understanding what I meant. As remembering more details. That's how lies behave when they're pressured gently. They don't explode. They erode. They crumble. They get smaller and smaller until they disappear. I watched family members compare notes privately. Text messages between cousins. Phone calls between aunts. I didn't lead them there. I let them discover it on their own. I let them piece it together without my help. Trust, once cracked, doesn't need help falling apart. Does that on its own. The fractures just keep spreading until there's nothing left to hold on to. My brother noticed. I could see him noticing how people's attitudes toward him had shifted. How they looked at him differently now. How they questioned things he said without him being there to defend himself. And I still hadn't said a single accusatory word. The power of that realization hit him hard. He started calling family members, trying to correct the record before it got worse. But every call he made, every explanation he offered, just dug him deeper. People started comparing the stories he told different family members. They didn't match. His details changed depending on who he was talking to. My aunt mentioned in passing that he'd told her one version of events, but then told my uncle something completely different. When she confronted him about it, he claimed he was just trying to protect people's feelings. But protection doesn't come in different versions. Truth is consistent. Lies require customization. I stayed quiet through all of it. I didn't intervene. I didn't correct him when he misspoke. I didn't jump in to prove him wrong. I just let him keep talking himself into a corner. My mother started organizing her own documents. Without asking me, without my suggestion, she pulled together old emails and receipts that supported my side of the story. She was building her own case independently. She was verifying what I'd shown her. That's when I knew he'd truly lost her. His panic was visible now. He'd spent so long controlling the narrative that he didn't know how to function without it. Every attempt to fix things made it worse. Every explanation created new inconsistencies. Every call he made just reminded people that he'd lied to them in different ways. When I finally spoke, it was brief. Called a family meeting. Not dramatic. Not angry. Just a meeting. Everyone came. My mother, my uncles, my aunts, my cousins. Even my brother. I stated facts only. Actions. Documents. I never used his name when I didn't have to. I never said lie. I said, this is what I have. This is what actually happened. I placed everything on the table. Literally. Papers. Documents. Printed emails. Copies of messages. All organized. All dated. All verified. Paper doesn't raise its voice. Doesn't need to. Paper just sits there and tells the truth. I explained the timeline. I explained what each document showed. I explained why the accusations didn't match the evidence. I explained it all in a calm, clear voice. Like I was reading a report. Like emotion had nothing to do with it. 'Cause it didn't. Not anymore. This wasn't about anger. This was about truth. My mother listened carefully, studying each document. She didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who'd already figured it out and was just waiting for confirmation. My uncle took notes, cross-referencing dates with things he remembered. My cousins exchanged looks with each other, silent conversations passing between them about what they were seeing. My brother sat perfectly still. His hands were clenched. His jaw was tight. He was waiting for me to finish, and I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. He was already planning his response, already preparing his defense. But I was done talking. I let the documents speak. I let the family absorb the information. I answered only the questions asked of me, and I answered them factually without emotion or interpretation. One of my aunts asked how long I'd been keeping these documents. I told her the truth: years. Since before the accusation. I wasn't trying to prove a point retroactively. I was just someone who kept records. Another cousin asked if I'd shared any of this with my brother before the family meeting. Said no. I'd given him a chance to correct himself privately, in the group chat. He'd chosen not to take it. He dug deeper instead. The weight of that silence after I finished speaking was immense. It was the sound of a family realizing they'd almost destroyed someone based on a lie they never verified. He reacted exactly as expected. Emotion. Volume. His voice got louder as he tried to explain away the documents. He accused me of betrayal. He framed himself as hurt. He said I was destroying the family by bringing this up. That worked for years. This time it sounded rehearsed. Like he was running through a script he'd used before. Someone asked him to slow down, to explain a specific discrepancy. He couldn't do it without contradicting something he'd said before. He stumbled. He got defensive. He raised his voice more. The room leaned away from him without realizing it. People shifted in their seats. They stopped making eye contact with him. They started looking at the documents on the table instead. That's when I knew it was working. Not because of anything I'd done, but because the truth had finally had room to breathe. He tried a different approach. He went after my credibility, suggesting I'd fabricated the documents. But everyone in the room knew my mother. They knew she wasn't the type to lie. And when he suggested the documents were fake, my mother calmly pulled out her own copies of the same messages. The ones she'd kept separately. The ones she'd organized after our conversation. That single moment changed everything. He couldn't claim I'd forged documents if my mother had the same ones. He couldn't deny the truth if multiple people had independently verified the same information. The fortress he'd built out of lies came crashing down because his defense only worked if people didn't check his facts. But they were checking now. My uncle pulled out his phone and showed messages on his own phone that corroborated what the documents said. My cousin mentioned an email thread he'd been part of that contradicted my brother's timeline. Each piece of evidence that came forward wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the family. They were testifying to the truth without me having to push. My brother's face went through every emotion at once. Anger, fear, desperation. He looked at each family member like they'd betrayed him, like they were supposed to be on his side, like he'd earned their loyalty through years of manipulation. But loyalty only lasts until the truth emerges. And the truth doesn't care about loyalty. He admitted to handling things poorly. Not lying, handling. A strategic word that suggested mistake rather than deception. But it was the first crack. The first time he'd acknowledged that his version of events might not be completely accurate. My mother looked at him the way she used to look at me when something didn't add up. That look shifted the room more than any document I could present. That look said she was reconsidering everything. He saw it. He knew what that look meant. And his face fell. He tried to recover. He tried to explain again. He tried to reframe it as miscommunication. But the moment had passed. The room had already started believing me instead of him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a big confrontation. It was just a quiet shift in where the truth was coming from. His admission, as weak as it was, gave people permission to stop defending him. If he was admitting to mistakes, then maybe there were bigger mistakes he was hiding. Maybe the accusations against me were part of a larger pattern of deception. Maybe his need to control the narrative came from a place of dishonesty. My uncle asked directly, "Were you trying to turn the family against her?" The question hung in the air. Simple. Direct. Impossible to answer without admitting guilt. My brother's mouth opened and closed several times. He couldn't deny it. The evidence was too clear. He couldn't reframe it as concern or protection. The motive was too obvious. He'd benefited from me being discredited. He'd gained power from my exclusion. He'd solidified his position as the family's decision-maker by destroying mine. The silence after that question was devastating, because everyone understood what it meant. Everyone realized they'd been complicit in his scheme by not asking the hard questions from the beginning. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Not tears of sadness. Tears of anger at herself for believing him. For not protecting me. For choosing the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. How long? She asked him. Just 2 words. But they meant everything. How long had he been manipulating the family? How long had this been going on? How many decisions had he influenced by lying? He didn't answer. He couldn't answer. Because the answer was, as long as anyone could remember. People spoke up. Quietly. One by one. They weren't angry. They were just tired of pretending they didn't remember things. They were just tired of accepting his narrative. My cousin mentioned something he'd been there for. A conversation he'd heard. Something that proved my side of the story. My uncle admitted he'd never actually asked my brother for clarification. He just accepted what he said. Aunt Ruth talked about that event again, but this time with certainty. This time without apologizing for her own memory. Small confirmations. Details. That's not how I remember it. I was there. I have a message that says otherwise. My brother's story no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the room. And the room was rewriting it based on truth, not loyalty. I asked it calmly. 1 sentence. 1 date. 1 action. If this happened the way you said it happened, why does this record exist? I wasn't angry. I was just curious. Just asking a simple question that had no easy answer. He stared at the paper too long. Longer than someone would stare if they actually had an explanation. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Silence answered for him. Everyone saw it. Everyone understood what that silence meant. It meant he didn't have an explanation. It meant the paper was proof. Meant I was right. He tried to speak, but the moment had already passed. His moment of control was over. He laughed. A nervous, strange laugh that sounded nothing like him. Then he stopped abruptly. He tried to redirect the conversation. He tried to make it about something else. He tried to appeal to emotion instead of logic. No one followed. No one went with him. They all stayed in the room with the truth instead. That's when I knew it was over. Not because I'd won in some dramatic way. But because the family had stopped protecting him from consequences. They'd stopped believing his narrative. They'd stopped letting him be the translator of what was true. He'd lost power. And arrogance, I learned, only survives when people give you their trust. He attempted to reframe everything as misunderstanding, as miscommunication, as different perspectives on the same events. But misunderstandings don't have consistent beneficiaries. Lies do. And this one benefited him perfectly. Every time. Without exception. Someone finally said it out loud. Not me. That mattered. It meant it wasn't just my word against his. It meant other people had arrived at the truth independently. You lied, my uncle said. Simple. Direct. True. My brother's face went pale. He tried to object. He tried to explain. But the word was out there now. And everyone could see it fitting perfectly with all the evidence. The air felt different. Lighter. Like something heavy had been set down. Awkward, yes. But also honest. People avoided my brother's eyes now. Not out of anger but out of something like pity. Like they finally saw him clearly. And they didn't like what they saw. He noticed. He always notices status shifts in a room. He could sense the shift away from him. Too late. He stood up. Made some excuse about having to leave. My mother didn't ask him to stay. No one did. He left, and the conversation continued without him. That was the final blow. Not his removal, but everyone's indifference to it. Messages came in over the next few days. From my mother. From Aunt Ruth. From my cousins. Carefully worded. Regret without accountability. I should have asked more questions. I'm sorry I believed him without checking. I feel terrible about how we treated you. I didn't need dramatic apologies. I didn't need them to perform guilt. I accepted their messages simply. I said, "Thank you for telling me. Healing doesn't require performance. Just requires honesty." My mother called. We talked for an hour. Not about my brother. About us. About why it had been easier to believe one voice than question comfort. About why we'd all just accepted his narrative without pushing back. "I'm sorry," she said. And I believed her. "I know," I said. He stopped showing up to family gatherings. Not out of shame, he wasn't capable of that. Out of control lost. Without an audience that believed him, without people defending his version of events. His narrative had no power. The stage was gone. He tried texting a few family members. Trying to rebuild what he'd lost. But his messages went unanswered or met with polite distance. People were done. Not dramatically done. As written. He'd spent years controlling the narrative. And the moment he lost that power, he lost everything else too. We talked openly for the first time in years. My mother and I. My aunts and uncles. My cousins. About favoritism. About how we'd let my brother be the narrator for so long. About why it had been easier to accept his version than question it. About why we'd silenced me instead of asking for my side. No yelling. Just truth. Uncomfortable, honest truth. About the patterns we'd fallen into. About the ways we'd hurt each other. About how silence had let a lie grow so big that it almost destroyed us. My mother cried. Not dramatic tears. Just quiet, real tears. She said she should have protected me. She said she was sorry for not fighting harder for me. I told her I understood. And I meant it. I didn't need an apology from my brother. I didn't need him to admit what he'd done or to perform remorse he didn't feel. I needed my name returned. I needed my family to know who I actually was instead of who he'd told them I was. And that's what I got. Naturally. Publicly. Without force. People started asking my opinion again. They started including me in conversations. They started treating me like someone whose word mattered. They started trusting me the way they'd trusted him. But this time they verified. This time they asked questions. This time they didn't just accept the narrative from one person. I was healed. Not because of an apology. But because the truth had finally been louder than the lie. I didn't win by destroying my brother. I won by refusing to carry a lie that wasn't mine. I won by staying quiet when he expected me to fight. I won by letting the evidence speak instead of my anger. Silence had done its job. Truth had finished it. And now I was free. Not from my brother. I was free from needing him to be honest. Free from needing him to apologize. Free from needing my family's validation of who I was. I knew who I was. The evidence proved it. My integrity proved it. My brother had gambled that I would either stay silent or fight loudly. He never expected me to do both. He never expected me to let the truth destroy his narrative without my voice needing to raise. That was the real revenge. Not destruction. Just clarity. Just the truth, sitting on the table where everyone could see it. And a family that finally understood what they'd almost lost.